I am Wes Bunce. I'm a native Floridian. A little brief that many of you do know me for the national Write Your Congressman, and I would like to tell you a little bit about the organization, but I'd really like to tell you three stories today. The first one is a war story. Second one is a childhood story. And the third one is what one man can do to reach the world. It happened to be 1940 in May. We were not in the war. In a little tiny town on the northeast corner of France named Dunkirk, the British and the French were gathered together. They were hemmed in by the German army. The High Command had delivered a message to wait for the Luftwaffe to bomb and destroy the Allied forces before the war had really grown. The British commander sent a three-word message back to Mr. Churchill in London. The three words, but if not. But if not. It was a code. Churchill, who was a scholar and also a Bible scholar, understood exactly what it meant. It came from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, verse 18. Three young boys were facing execution because they had said they would not bow to the king. They were threatened with the fact that they had to change their names, change their diet, and worship a false god. And they said, our God is able to deliver us from that fiery furnace. And the king did exactly what he said he was going to do, and he threw them in the furnace, and they walked out. Churchill, knowing this history of this very famous statement, knew that his army was backed up against a fiery furnace. And that night, 600 boats arrived and rescued every single British soldier. The French, hands in the air, and turned their country over to Germany. We entered the war, of course, shortly thereafter at Normandy, and we know the rest of that story. The second story, a little boy, 5 years old, in my hometown, Miami, Florida. The year is 2000. It's a presidential election year. Elian Gonzalez, adopted by his family of Cubans, was taken at 5 o'clock in the morning by an order of our government and removed to a communist country where his mother and father had lived. Elian Gonzalez. Why is that such a special name and person? He was unknown. He was singular. But what the history books will not record, my dad was running for the State House of Representatives that year in Dade County. He was a county commissioner. He's also the grandson of John C. Calhoun, Vice President of the United States under Andy Jackson, which this city is named after. I was in Jacksonville at the time and watching the presidential election with great interest. And what happened in the next few hours changed world history. When the vote came down that night, I got a call from my dad. He said, you know, a strange thing has happened. I had been told that the possibility of election fraud was real in Dade County. And I knew most everybody, certainly the supervisor of elections in their office, and I knew there was a possibility that since I was running a campaign that was definitely against the establishment, that I might be a target. So what did he do? He took his aide, and as you vote in your own precinct, you're able to watch the vote count before they deliver the ballots that go down to the supervisor of elections. And so he'd gotten the vote count, and he'd won his precinct, which is not unusual for you to do. But he suspected something was wrong, and he sent his aide to follow the car that just crossed the causeway over to downtown Miami. He got a call from his aide 5 minutes later, and he said, I lost the car. Dad says, how do you lose a car? 30 miles an hour. I'm doing 100 miles an hour. I'm on the 436 West Expressway going right toward the Everglades. So my dad, pretty smart character, calls the supervisor of elections and says, I have a question. It's about 7:30 in the evening. I just kind of checking to see how the votes are coming in from my precinct. And he said, well, your votes are all in. And I said, they are. I would be curious to know what the vote count is in that precinct, because he had in his hand the vote count. He'd lost his precinct. That's what was reported. Very interesting. The votes had not even arrived. They had gone to a warehouse. The same system that they had used in Chicago, Illinois in 1960, where they actually manufactured ballots and delivered pre-processed ballots to the supervisor, was happening right there in my dad's race. We filed a lawsuit in 2000 and went to the governor's office in Tallahassee. The case has still not been heard. That night, if you watch the news on the election returns, Palm Beach County arrested the supervisor of elections with 2 voting machines in the trunk of his car. Why do I bring this story up? Because of this boy, Elian Gonzalez. At 7:23 that night, Fox News reported that Al Gore had won the state of Florida in the presidential election. At 7:23, they hadn't even closed the polls in Pensacola, in the Panhandle. That's what I say to my friends that say that Fox News is a conservative organization. I know differently. I've been in this business for 44 years. I have seen everything that there is in politics, from the murdering of a congressman who I work for, to seeing my dad denied a seat, and seeing this little boy in my hometown arrested and taken to a foreign prison because he represented a threat. What kind of threat? The threat happened that night. When the election totals came in, George Bush won the state of Florida after they had challenged it in the Supreme Court. And all the lawyers and the media started showing up in Dade County, Florida. They were not anticipating that Republican George Bush had won the state of Florida. The interviews began. And at the end of that tally, there were 60,000 Cubans who had voted for George Bush. Would it surprise you to know that all 60,000 voted for Bill Clinton 4 years before that? So the media pundits asking the questions, why did you change your vote? And there was only one answer. That boy, Elian Gonzalez. And we got a president. And that's the second story. What a difference a boy can make. The third story, you're going to love this one because somebody's already made a comment about lobbyists, and this is, having been around the Washington scene for all these years, I love this. When I left Larry McDonald's leadership, when he was killed on the Korean airliner, and 31 years ago over the Kamchatka Peninsula, I came back to Jacksonville, a consultant to the shipyards right across the corner here at Commodore's Point. I was a consultant for the shipyards to protect them against EPA and OSHA. We won every single case. But in that 5-year tenure of doing that work, I ran for Congress against Charlie Bennett. Everybody said, you are one foolish young man. 1992. Charlie Bennett had been in office. The day I was born, he stepped out of the University of Florida into the U.S. Congress and stayed there until I ran against him in 1992 as a Democrat, changing my party to run as an incumbent. And I learned that technique from Dr. McDonald. He said, you want to beat an incumbent, you run in their primary. You break their back. So I did. Charlie Bennett stepped down. And the leadership of the party came to me and said, you know, we can't give you the nomination. I said, I knew that. I'm not interested in going back to Washington. Well, why did you do it? I said, because too long have we seen incumbents who don't really represent the views. The reason I beat him in the public opinion that I heard from was because I took two issues. He voted against a balanced budget every time he had the opportunity, and he bounced 7 checks in the House banking scandal. That was a man who was not even opposed. He ran unopposed. So in 1992, that changed because Tilly Fowler became the congresswoman that took that seat, and we've had it ever since. And now we've got a friend, Ryman Shove, trying to stay in there and bring the true American values. So when this campaign was over and my time was up, I was decommissioning the Saratoga here in Jacksonville in 1996. And after that job was over, I got a phone call from National Write Your Congressman. And they said, you know, you're a very partisan individual, your views. But we have a great need for somebody that has knowledge about the state of Florida. And since I had obviously started in Miami and ended up in Jacksonville, I pretty much knew the North and the South. And they said, well, if you can put your personal opinion in your pocket, you can go to work for us. And I said, well, tell me about your organization. Where did it come from? Well, the man's name was David Adamson. David Adamson had worked for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for 23 years. He rose. He was one of the national leaders. And in 1958, the lobby that we now know as the Chamber of Commerce stopped representing small business. That's 1958. He said, you know, I just can't do this anymore. He went home, and this is where your believers will love the story, got on his knees with his family in his house and said, tell me, Lord, what I'm supposed to do. He formed the national, it was called the Dallas Write Your Congressman Club. And he started right there in his district. By the end of the year, he had to hire 3 representatives like me to cover the state of Texas. 10 years later, this organization, which became the National Write Your Congressman, is twice the size of the U.S. Chamber, and no one's heard of him. He'd learned a secret. You get in bed with the enemy, you die with the enemy. He said, I will never use the media. I will build an organization around the principles, and if you've all met me, the ones that know me, you know, I always like to use the mission statement of Write Your Congressman. I think Harold is probably the first member that's in this room that I remember bringing into the membership. And it says, we're here to encourage responsible Americans to use their influence in government to preserve the freedom set forward by the Founding Fathers. David Adamson, one man, built an organization that today has 1 million members in every state, with 300 of me every day trying to find you. Small businesses who provide 60% of the tax revenue, 80% of the jobs, so that we can have representation in Washington. Now, as an exercise for you all to help me today, for giving this little speech, I have Bob and Judy Wolf, and Judy is holding what is known as a ballot. Now, some of you already know what a ballot is, but those of you who don't, this will be your first chance. We're going to get to Write Your Congressman today on the health care bill. Why the health care bill? John Boehner came to our organization in December and said, you know, you are the loudest voice in Washington. You deliver 35,000 of these a day to the Capitol, quietly. We want to hear during the spring session from March until August the 1st from every one of your rep members about the health care bill, because we know up here on the Hill this system is going to crash. We don't know when. And the reason is I've taken 45 separate votes since the Supreme Court decision. We have not funded $1 for Obamacare. Now, isn't it interesting that just yesterday the Circuit Court said there's no subsidies for the federal exchanges. Half the people who have signed up on a federal exchange for health insurance, and they're not going to get it. And this system is going to implode. There is a panic going on inside the Department of Justice, HHS, the White House, right now. So what he asked us to do is, we know there's going to be either a reform or a repeal. So you go and you ask them. Don't tell them. Just ask them, what do they want? So this ballot that she's going to pass out to you, you can fill those answers out, and the best and most important part of the ballot is the back side. Those of you that know me will know this. You write on your ballot what you want to tell the congressman. If you write on it, every one of them reads it. You know where I found that out? Tilly Fowler. The last time I met Tilly, I said, Tilly, what do you think of this system where we send you ballots directly from these small businesses? She says, let me tell you what I do. Every Tuesday, I close my door. As you know, in my office, there's a light. In every congressman's office, there's a light. That light goes off, so I got to go to the floor and vote. But I read the ballots. Now, the ones that just check off the ballot, my aide hands me a tally sheet. I don't deal with those. But if somebody's willing to write, which means commit their values to me, that's who I represent. The congressman I served with in Washington, Larry McDonald, taught me this principle. So when I saw it here, I said, this will work. He said, the first time I ran for Congress in 1970, I did a fundraiser. When I came back 2 years later, this is Dr. Larry McDonald, he said, I told all of my allies and friends, I will never ask for another dollar. As long as you keep me. All I'm going to do when I come back is pass out my voting record. If this isn't what you want, I don't want to be here. In 1982, right before that airliner was shot down and killed him, he had the largest voter return of any U.S. congressman. So you can win without money. Ask Eric Cantor in Virginia. Ask me in a little tiny place like Jacksonville, Florida. It is not about money. It never will be about money. Because the scripture says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, and like rivers of water, he moves it where he wills. I think Barack Obama has done me the biggest favor I've ever had. Southeastern United States, I just got back from Atlanta with the chairman of the board of the largest grassroots organization in America, and he says, you know what, you guys in the South, you're turning the country upside down. What are you talking about? He said, do you realize that the western states have dominated our organization for 55 years? We get very little participation out of New England. Shouldn't be any surprise here. But we were always wondering why the South was a sleeper. Because the root values of America are here. Look at California, you can understand that's not part of the formula. He said, we have had in the southeastern states this last year 38% growth. That means that many more members. And that means we've had to hire more of you guys. So I'm on the prowl. I'm looking for more people. We've got 8 in the state of Florida. When I started here in '96, we had 2. You know, trying to reach 15 million people with 2 people. So anyway, what I really bring this to a culmination is to let you know that we are right now at the crossroads of an evolution happening at a midterm. The midterm of 1994, in my personal opinion, is the biggest moral reformation that the Americans have ever seen since 1776. In 1994, when the Senate was taken, Bill Clinton had a meeting with Newt Gingrich. And Newt said to him, now that we have the House and the Senate, the rules change. You just attempted to pass national health care. It didn't work. Now here's our agenda. We're going to take down the welfare system, Mr. Clinton. We're going to have a defense of marriage. We're going to pass the first law against the IRS. We're going to have a balanced budget, which we haven't had in 30 years. And do you know what else we're going to do? I want you to remember the year, 1994. We're going to impeach you. What for? Ever heard the name Monica Lewinsky? That name was, if you go back and check your newspapers, was not in the newspapers until 1998. He said, but here's the deal, Mr. Clinton. You go along with the contract of America, and we can save you from a trial. No president has ever been removed. Some have stepped down. 1994, balanced budget, impeachment, war to go to war in Iraq under the American flag, the first time since 1945. And we won the war, and then this president gave it back to him. It may not be too late, we hope not. So, you and I have a commandment. It's in the Declaration of Independence. It's the very last sentence, and this is why I get up every day and do what I do. And I face a lot of negative. I interview 2,000 businesses a year and have done it for, this is my 18th year. We pledge our lives, Larry McDonald, our fortunes. I knew Bunker Hunt. He was a part of the conservative movement way back in the 70s and 80s. We pledge our sacred honor. So we have a God family organization, and that cannot be destroyed because the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, and he's going to move it on your behalf. So we can impeach presidents if we want. We can send people to jail. Maybe Lois Lerner will be the first one to actually visit the jailhouse now that the resolution has been passed. And as of last Friday, the articles of impeachment were drawn against Eric Holder, the Attorney General. There was an inside poll taken last week. Are you ready for this? 280 members of Congress are ready to impeach the President of the United States. But Boehner won't let him do it, and he's gone out publicly and said it. But he didn't use one word. Yet. This is one smart man. Don't you be fooled. Because this time there's going to be a trial. And we're going to win that Senate. Americans are going to take back this government like they did in '94, and you're going to see things you never even thought of. I've seen some of the plans they have. This is going to be a restoration like you think you could dream about. America's ready for an economic boom and sell the idea to the rest of the world, which is hungry for it, like never before. And we're just a short few months away. So if you will help by sending this ballot to your congressman, whether it be Crenshaw, Yoho, or Miss Brown, it will help solve the problem of the health care. Don't be bashful when you talk to a congressman. You tell them what you want. Don't reason with them. As Tilly said, I read these ballots. That governs me because I don't know anything about the military. I know nothing about guns. I don't know anything about health care. I'm a lawyer. So I depend on the experts in my district. You are the experts. I am. We live here. This is our town. This is our community. Tell them what you want. They will do it, because if they don't, the record is 202 members of Congress fired in 2 years, a 40% turnover, the largest turnover in U.S. history. 680 state office holders removed in the last 2 years. So David Adamson had a brilliant idea. Follow the Constitution and let the people get the information, not from the media, right from the source. So write your congressman, we'll give you that information. If you're interested in this and you're not a part of what we're doing, there are many in the room who are. I have right here, we give out these books, thanks to Fitzhugh Powell right across the river here, Cecil Powell Insurance. The founding documents, if you haven't got those. Bumper stickers. and a radio card. The radio card is a brand new experiment. Twee Low, Ryman, Schoaf have been guests on our program. We started 8 weeks ago. It is a We the People 1787 effort to educate the public. Many of them don't own businesses like we do, and they still are hungry to have the truth, so we're spreading the word. If it goes as planned with your help, we will actually be syndicating this program through the summer across the nation, and the strategy is, since this is an inside group, other than what we broadcast, we should be able to hit the entire nation by Election Day with the published names of the senators who voted for Obamacare. There were 21 of them who are running for re-election, with one exception. 6 of them have already resigned, not even running. So if in fact history repeats itself, we should have a very, very good election. Do you have any questions?
Are you going to take these up and mail them?
Yes, I am. If you will please, if you can fill those out while I'm here, I'll wait as long as I have to. These are going to the Capitol today. They're in session just one more week. I want to have these, I want them thinking about what you say all through the summer months. Strongly worded. Yes, Billy. Oh.
Dan had her hand up.
Yes, ma'am.
I have been privy to eyewitnessing of voter fraud here in Duval County.
Oh, wow.
I had gone to our supervisor of elections, reported it, and one of the things that I have a great concern on, having been in the military, is I told him that, because they're saying that I was going to be a poll worker now. And they said, well, you need to register for your absentee ballot. And I said, hell to the no. Because you never counted my only vote when I was in the military. You sure as heck aren't going to count it now. And he goes, oh, yes, 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 we do. I said, really? Then how can you call a ballot when I know they have not been received in the country? You cannot count all those ballots during the day, and you don't even report how many you get, how many went out, and how many are counted at the end of the day. So that also is a big problem, and I know if it's a problem here, it's a problem everywhere.
I have heard so many stories on that, I could write a literal book on voter fraud. I actually met Richard Nixon. When I left the Navy, I really loved that experience. We got to see the world. This is the Vietnam era. Richard Nixon, I played golf with his pastor. I was a golf professional when I left the Navy. And I got saved on a golf course, and that's how I got steered into the crazy political world I'm in today. And I'm playing with John Huffman, Dick Nixon's pastor, Presbyterian Church in Key Biscayne. And I said, what happened to Nixon? He said, he lied to me. I said, really? He said, yeah, Richard Nixon could have been a great president, but he got caught up in election fraud. They stole the election from him in Chicago in 1960. So when he got elected in 1968, he vowed that he would get that information that they knew was at the DNC, which we all know is called the Watergate story, and he would expose it through the media, because there was no way Congress, under Democratic leadership, was going to ever launch any investigations or hearings about the fraud going on in the DNC. So he was going to blow the whistle himself, realizing what potential challenges that could be. So he lied to cover up what he was doing. Nixon said, the only thing I did wrong is I got caught. Because had I been able to do what I was trying to do, we would have never had the problems we have faced for the last 30 years here in this country. That's a very interesting perspective. Any other questions? I'm sorry. I got to rambling.
National Write Your Congressman is usually for business owners, is that correct?
It is.
Do you have any for individuals?
Yes.
A program for individuals?
When the boss came to Atlanta 2 months ago, he said, you now know we have the first outside organization in the nation's capital Every new member of Congress goes through our orientation. The actual president of our company goes to Washington when the new Congress comes in, and we teach them about the ballot. And we deliver this ballot, by the way, the first time in person like this, but everyone after that goes electronically with a cyber-secure link that Congress gave to us exclusively. Because you understand, 50 years of doing it without ever taking sides as an organization. We're not a lobby. We built trust. After they gave us that permission, then they said, you know what a mobile application is? Oh, yeah. If you've got a smartphone, and I got mine here, I got a mobile app. I can watch live press conferences. I can vote and not even have to be a member of Write Your Congressman. So our members, when I do my visits each year, I tell them, look, it's your responsibility now to reach people who don't own businesses because I can't call on them. And you tell them they can go online, they can register and get a mobile app, and they can vote and get educated. Because the secret here is the education part. It's not national Write Your Congressman. It is getting the truth in time to tell your local representative or whoever it is. So yes, you can individually join as an individual, but we're looking for reaching the 120 million low information people who depend on nothing but media, whether it's newspapers, radio, or TV. Hopefully we'll see some changes through the media as we start driving these issues. And by the way, one of the guests we had right before TWE was Admiral Kubik. Does anybody, besides the guys that I know who Admiral Kubik is? He is the admiral that has driven the investigation to Trey Gowdy. I introduced Admiral Kubik to Admiral Lyons. I introduced Admiral Kubik to Michelle Bachmann in the Intelligence Committee. After that little meeting, would you believe they called a National Press Club conference, and the two admirals and the two CIA officers, which you can watch on Bob Wolf's website, and you can pick up a card so you can, log on. You can watch every one of the shows that we've done is now archived. Admiral Kubik tells the story of what happened in Benghazi. It's a fascinating story. And when Trey Gowdy is done as a prosecutor, he's never lost a case in 14 years. When he's done with this group, I would feel sorry for anybody. And by the way, Hillary Clinton will be deposed in that committee. I don't worry about her, not one bit. I wouldn't waste a moment's breath on her. We've got so many great candidates that are from Governor Perry and Rand Paul, and there are just so many good ones out there. But remember, you build the House at the bottom first, you get the House and the Senate, and then you can do like we did. We got the House and the Senate in '94, then we got Bush. So we actually had a good cohesive government there until we had a mental lapse and somehow allowed this politically correct gentleman to become our president.
Talk about Thad Cochran race.
Okay, Thad Cochran race. There are a lot of people asking me out in the field about Thad Cochran. Thad Cochran, of course, a 40-year incumbent senator from the state of Mississippi, was challenged. Not Dave Bratt, he was Virginia. McDaniel, yeah. Mr. McDaniel, actually, if you look at the numbers in the election results, in the primary runoff, if you exclude the 35,000 Democrats who crossed the aisle to vote for Thad Cochran, he, Daniels, won the election. So right now there is a contest going on in the courts, and also how McDaniels wants to posture himself for the general. Because if he's a write-in candidate, he can win it. It'd be very difficult to do. It doesn't happen very often, but the reality is you've got a candidate who really represents the will of the changing Republican Party in the state of Mississippi. But he obviously has been overrun by some of the Republican leadership, at least at this point.
And the chamber.
And the chamber, absolutely, the Chamber of Commerce. So we go back to the beginning. Lobbies. One story on lobbies and you'll be done forever. is a lobby walks into a congressman's office. This happened in our office. He opens a briefcase that's got $100,000 in cash, and this is legal. Mr. Congressman, this is for your vote on our bill, because, you know, the people in your district don't know what's going on. Now, you know this money can't go here. Tell Jesse Jackson Jr., who's sitting in a federal prison with his wife and just lost his pension.
Yeah, you did lose it?
That happened last year. And by the way, that was one of the Write Your Congressman ballots this year, was to change the pension rules and force the earmarks out, get rid of these earmarks, pensions, and no more gifts and trips from the lobbyists. So this is a big change in Washington. The next step is the fair tax, which is in committee now. Fair tax is in committee. It has, we're estimating right now, 200 co-sponsors. When you get to 300, I don't care who's in the Senate. It will become law. That is the experience legislatively. If you get 300 co-sponsors in the House, it drives the states to what they're demanding. That is how we got the IRS Accountability Act. It was a 300 votes for the IRS Accountability Act, which is now law. A lot of people don't know about that, but it's real. And so you can affect that kind of a change. So feel like you're a part of the changing culture back to what the Constitution called for.
When do you think that fair tax will come into effect?
Do I think fair tax what?
When do you think it'll come into effect?
I think that Boehner's strategy is to wait until the term, the beginning of the next term, to make a push publicly for it. Right now, the effort is trying to move toward impeachment after the election. And once that happens, then many of these bills that have been bottled up in committee can come out. And alternative media will drive them to the public. So we're a part of that, small part, but I think, you know, for us it's important. Yes, sir.
Yes. What's the outlook in Washington, D.C. About the 10th Amendment movement that is going through the states and alternative?
Okay, that's a very great question. The 10th Amendment, if you haven't heard about the 10th Amendment movement, there are actually two parts to it. One part is called the Con. That's the Constitutional Convention. We have not had a Constitutional Convention, as you know, since 1787. When they brought the Articles of Confederation in, and they said, we're calling this to get federal taxing. We don't have central taxing authority, and it really restricted our effort in the war. So we want to have taxes. Well, while they got in the convention, they decided, you know what? We need to throw the whole thing out and bring in a new constitution, and they did. So for someone to say that you can restrict a convention to one issue like you're hearing today, balanced budget amendment, have you been hearing that language? They're trying to use the balanced budget amendment to bring a constitutional convention. I am personally opposed to that. We don't want a convention. All we need to do is take on those issues one at a time and say, yes, you can have an amendment to the Constitution without calling an amendment. You know how you do it. It's in your Constitution. I carry mine with me every day. It tells you how you do it at the federal level. We've amended the Constitution 17 times without calling a convention. So if you need a balanced budget amendment, go through that process. However, the 10th Amendment, which states, unless specifically provided for in the Constitution, all power rests with the states and the individuals, you and I exercise that when you send a ballot. That piece of paper, you have no idea how valuable that piece of paper is. It's an invisible communication. It goes from you, the people who pay the taxes, to those who spend the money. And that's the reason Obamacare will fail, because it doesn't have the appropriation. It'll self-destruct. Mark my words. How it happens is kind of fun theater to watch it happening. And all the players are on the stage trying to get attention. And so watch for that to happen next. Yes, sir.
With regards to your comments earlier about Fox News, what is your opinion for good news sources?
Okay, Fox News. Now this is some people are going to really have problems with this, what I'm going to make the statement about. But I've been in this media business a long time, had a television show in Orlando before I even came to work for Write Your Congressman, had 2 radio shows when I ran for Congress, and I've been around the media people a long time. Dad, obviously being in office, we dealt with the media. What I learned was, how do you deal with the wire services? Reuters, AP, UPI, BBC. These wire services are actually editorial boards, and Murdoch owns Fox News. This is a personal story because it deals with Dr. McDonald. You ever heard of Hustler magazine? You wouldn't think too highly of that. Hustler magazine is owned by Larry Flint. Larry Flint is Rupert Murdoch's best friend. So you wonder why sometimes you don't get the whole story. Even the things that I've told you today that are public record, Fox has never touched. You've got some people on their staff like Sean Hannity, maybe Bill O'Reilly a little bit. I think he's more of a showman than anything else. But Mr. Murdoch made a brilliant move, because that the media in the general scope had been very liberal, whether it was print media, the newspapers, or whether it was the cameras. And he perceived that if we could bring the image of a conservative balance, Fox News, fair and balanced, right, that he would have a market. Pretty smart guy, and he hired Roger Ailes to run the conservative platform. But when it comes down to making the final decisions on what stories are going to be pushed and what is going to happen, sometimes good stories don't happen. They get spiked. I call it spiked. So I think that Fox News is in for a rude awakening, because I think alternative media is going to develop and displace them if they don't respond. And I don't think Murdoch's going to change. He's just not that type of person. Fox News, News Corporation that he owns. He's already found trouble in England, as you probably know. They fired a bunch of people on his staff. So just give something time, and you will see whether it produces fruit or it turns into a viper. And we've got to protect ourselves against that.
So you think that Boehner should remain as Speaker of the House?
Absolutely. I think John Boehner is the greatest secret weapon we ever had.
Okay, you have to explain that one.
Okay. I'll tell you an interesting interview. John Boehner had an interview with Sean Hannity that I actually had a chance to listen to, because obviously I'm up and on my feet all day long and interviewing. I don't get a chance to really hear much of it, but I did hear this interview. This is right after he got reelected as the Speaker the second time. He said, what do you think is going to happen in this next session? And he says, well, one thing, I sure learned a new lesson, and I've been here over 20 years in Washington. Well, what's your lesson? He said, my staff came to me and said, have you ever watched your press conferences? Well, what would you think? Why would you ever watch your press conferences? Are you some kind of an egomaniac? No, I never watch my press conferences. I give the press conference and I move on. Come into the office. They had prepared a soliloquy of his press conferences. You'll never guess what the media had done on his press conferences. Right about the time he's about to make the party position statement, the media comes and does a voiceover and cut him off. Boehner never knew that they had done that. So he then says, you won't see me doing many press conferences anymore. A very interesting statement. And I have found out through this process that we have with Admiral Kubik about what's about to happen on this Benghazi. When Michelle Bachmann told me that the IRS, the VA, and the Fast and Furious scandals are distractions from the big one, Benghazi is the big one. Because as the media, and if you go to our website, you can watch this interview. The National Press Club, the reporter said this is treason. Those are the words. So that's where we're going. And this is going to be the sentinel case to take this guy down. Now, you know what will happen, just like Nixon. As soon as they call for the trial, he'll resign. But that's all right. If it is treason, the grand jury will convene. And if you don't know anything about law, I will tell you something about our Constitution. It's very clear about treason. You go to a grand jury and you're convicted, you will be publicly executed. No exemption in law. I tell you, don't ever think. This is the very soul of our nation that we're facing, the corruption. Yes?
If President Obama were impeached and came to trial and was found
Removed.
guilty of all these different things, what would happen to like all of his executive orders and the things that he'd done in the past? Would that make all of that null and void?
It can.
Oh,
It can make null and void, just like this one unanimous court decision. By the way, there have been 13 Supreme Court decisions against the president. 13, not one. 13 to nothing. I mean, 9 to nothing by the court. 13 of them. Why isn't the news telling us this? They can absolutely do that. They can declare null and void, because that's what's going to happen with the recess appointments. All of those, the labor, NLRB, decisions that were made with the recess appointments will be removed.
No,
That's tremendous.
they go back and review every single one, and the board, who are the actual members, can just sign off and say, yes, it's okay.
Huh.
That's what's going to happen.
Well, I think the biggest thing that's affected that, and it's going to affect what will happen with this court decision that just happened,
Yeah.
is what Harry Reid did to change the Senate rules. Because they packed the D.C. court, and Obama's now going back and asking for a full D.C. court review with his packed court of the decision that just went against him.
You want that, and I'll tell you why you want that. The reason you want that is that everybody responds in a midterm that goes to the polls. You know, only 30% of the people are going to the polls, right? 80% went to the polls. 126 million people voted in the general with the president 2 years ago. Only 30% are going to go to the polls because the public thinks the president's king. They don't think Congress is king. That's where you want to keep them. And the reason I say that, you want this decision to happen that way, because the fury, and I see it every day when I'm out there, and these owners that I talk to, that message goes down to their employees. They live it. And they are going to call for his head in this election by removing all of them. You thought this last one was exciting with 202 gone? This is going to be something on this November. I just pray we can make it there, and they don't start a international war conflict, which is pending in Israel. I mean, you know how close we are to war? Does anybody know? I was in Israel in 1983, right before Larry was killed. I met with the Israeli government. I actually was part of forming the first conservative political party in Israel called the Likud. Ehud Olmert was the leader of the Knesset at the time. He became prime minister under Ariel Sharon when he had a stroke. They told us at that time, this is 83, after they've won 5 wars, they said, we are waiting for the big one. Big one. What do you mean big one? We know the next battle strategy is that they are going to be arming Syria, Iran, and their client countries, which are Lebanon, and of course today called the Gaza. They're going to arm them, and they are going to plan a strategic launch on Israel to hit 2 cities, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. When we find out, when our intelligence tells us they're going to do that, it's all over. That is a world war. And that is what we should be praying, that put that off, Lord, a little bit longer, because that could really spoil things. And with that explosive statement, I think you've had enough of me.
Well, we have till 1:30, so
Okay.
I think it's on track.
Tell us about the significance of Egypt and a couple other countries siding with Israel on this conflict.
The media communication on Egypt, Jordan, etc., is sincere. They really do not want to see this blow up into an all-out event. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting to see Iran right now backing away from their formerly aggressive position. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them broker a peace deal at this point with Israel and the Gaza, which is Hamas. Hamas is headquartered, by the way, out of Damascus, Syria. It's not headquartered over there on the West Bank.
I thought it was at the White House.
Yeah, that's one. So you're welcome to anything on the table. And please, I want these ballots. I want to put them in their offices today. And if you put your representative, oh, that's the one thing you got to do. You got to put your representative's name on that top line. I am also going to send it to Bill Nelson for you at the same time. Because Boehner said, send it to if you have a senator who voted for Obamacare. Rubio didn't, so I'm going to be sending it to Nelson as well as your representative.